Marcella? Forget mosh pits and crowds of ravers. Some DJs in Germany created a drive-in disco. Vehicles lined up in front of the stage honking in approval. Restless residents.
As stay-at-home orders are lifted in many states, preliminary analysis reportedly developed for the government shows various scenarios, including a possible dramatic spike in the number of U.S. deaths heading into the summer. But the reality of the economic setbacks has some ready to take the risk.
With 6 months until Election Day, how the two candidates stack up against each other, and what will the campaign season look like? As the longest lockdown in Europe comes to an end, millions of Italians are now returning to work with new guidelines. Our James Longman is there. And while we've been focused on our physical health, this month we're also checking in on our mental health. Our Dan Harris is here to help calm your mind, while Maggie Ruley helps you dance it all away. Tonight, some strategies for self-care.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. A striking new number released today from that preliminary analysis we mentioned from Johns Hopkins that the number of deaths from COVID-19 could increase to 3,000 a day by June. That's roughly one American death every 30 seconds. At the same time, 38 states have now reopened. Nearly a dozen are in the process of revising guidelines. More clashes today as protesters rallied against protection orders. In Boston, a large demonstration at the Massachusetts State House demanding the governor reopen the economy after extending the order. And social distancing in the Senate. Lawmakers in session today wearing face masks on the floor. Our Whit Johnson has more on the changing face and landscape across America.
Tonight, as much of America wrestles to reopen, the New York Times obtaining a preliminary analysis about what could happen if social distancing rules are relaxed. The report provided to FEMA to aid in scenario planning paints a stark image of what may lay ahead. The data put together by Johns Hopkins shows the number of Americans dying every day from the coronavirus could nearly double by June 1st, 3,000 a day, and cases could soar from 25,000 to 200,000 a day. The White House says the data does not reflect modeling and has not been vetted by its coronavirus task force. But the president now acknowledging the death toll could climb to 100,000.
We're going to lose anywhere from 75, 80 to 100,000 people. That's a horrible thing.
But as the country starts to reopen and more Americans pack parks and beaches, the challenge now, how to protect the public. And in some cases, temperatures are reaching a boiling point. In Flint, Michigan, Calvin Munnerlin, 43, a father of 8 and a security guard, allegedly killed after a dispute over a customer not wearing a mask. A family of 3 now charged with murder.
It is incredibly sad that in this crisis that this life was lost. And I ask that all Michiganders do the right thing, keep their wits about them.
In Texas, this park ranger informing a crowd about social distancing shoved into the water at Lake Austin. 25-year-old Brandon Hicks arrested and charged with attempted assault. And in New York, police launching an internal investigation after this video surfaced showing the arrest of 3 people allegedly violating social distancing orders on Saturday. Today, dense crowds in Boston at this protest at the State House. The White House coronavirus response coordinator concerned about the risk at those rallies like this one in Michigan.
It's devastatingly worrisome to me personally, because if they go home and infect their grandmother or their grandfather who has a comorbid condition and they have a serious or an unfortunate outcome, they will feel guilty for the rest of our lives.
38 states now easing restrictions.
There's not too many states that I know of that are going up. Almost everybody is headed in the right direction. I think most of the numbers are coming down. We're on the right side of it.
But in 17 states, the virus is still surging. Some of those states opening up have not seen the recommended 14-day decline in cases. And the virus's deadly march felt all over the country. In Chicago, 22-year-old mother Nyla Moore losing her fight with the virus after 3 weeks on a ventilator. Her dream was to teach children with special needs. In Las Vegas, Veronica Wells and her husband are balancing mounting bills and coronavirus fears. She's terrified of her husband returning to work at a homeless shelter.
We really don't have any options. He's 50 years old. He's got asthma. He's got a compromised immune system. So it's just very scary.
For doctors on the front lines like Umesh Gidawani at New York's Mount Sinai Hospital, there is worry about the patients right in front of him and the weeks ahead.
Are we going to see spikes coming back, especially as we start to relax and loosen some of the restrictions that we are used to?
And Tom Yamas joins us now. Tom, today we're hearing from the #2 official of the CDC, who seems to be saying that the government didn't act quickly enough to stop the virus as it was first spreading from Europe.
That's right, Lindsay. Dr. Ann Schuchat is the #2 at the CDC. She says limited testing and delayed travel alerts with Europe helped drive the outbreak here in the U.S. She says in February alone, 2 million people traveled from Italy and other countries. The travel ban didn't take effect with those countries until March 11th. She writes this, and she says it in very stark terms. We clearly didn't recognize the full importations that were happening. Lindsay?
Tom Yamas for us again tonight. Thanks so much, Tom. And let's turn now to Washington, where President Trump is stepping up his criticism of China, saying in an interview on Fox News last night that China made a, quote, horrible mistake in its virus response. Secretary of State Pompeo going even further, saying on ABC's This Week Sunday that there is enormous evidence the pandemic began in a Chinese lab. And tonight, a growing number of countries are calling for an investigation. Here's ABC's chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl.
To President Trump, there is no doubt who is to blame for the coronavirus pandemic.
It came from China. It should have been stopped. It could have been stopped on the spot. They chose not to do it, or something happened. Either there was incompetence or they didn't do it for some reason. And we're going to have to find out what that reason was.
The U.S. is accusing China of covering up just how devastating the virus was when it first hit. A report by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, obtained by ABC News, concludes, quote, the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January while it stockpiled medical supplies. And over the weekend, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told ABC's Martha Raddatz that he has seen evidence that the virus came from this lab in Wuhan, China, a theory pushed by the president as well.
And, Mr. Secretary, have you seen anything that gives you high confidence that it originated in that Wuhan lab?
Martha, there's enormous evidence that that's where this began. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
But the administration has not made any evidence public. When asked if the virus spread was accidental or intentional, Secretary Pompeo said he could not answer. The director of national intelligence has said the intelligence community is investigating, quote, whether the outbreak began through contact with infected animals or if it was the result of an accident at a laboratory in Wuhan. The Chinese government knows it's not just Donald Trump placing blame. According to Reuters, the Chinese Ministry of State Security has reported to Chinese leaders that anti-China sentiment around the world is at its highest level since the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. So high, the report says, that China should be prepared for the possibility of war with the United States.
And Jonathan Karl joins us now from Washington. And John, the Secretary of State said that the U.S. is going to hold China accountable for this virus. So what is the White House saying about what, if any, action they could take?
Lindsay, the president has been much less definitive on that question than the Secretary of State. On Friday, he said that he wants to find out what happened before making a decision on retaliation. And then just yesterday, he was asked if any retaliation could include new tariffs on China. And this was his answer, quote, we're all playing a complicated game of chess or poker here. Bottom line, it's unclear what the president has in mind about retaliation, whether there will be retaliation, and if so, what form it would take.
Yeah, just know that it's, I guess, on the table. Okay, Jonathan Karl, thanks so much for us. We're now exactly 6 months until Election Day in November, and if the last 3 months are any indication, it will be unlike anything we can imagine. President Trump versus former Vice President Joe Biden facing off during a global pandemic. So how will the candidates take each other on? How will Americans cast their ballots? And will any other issues besides coronavirus even matter? Our Terry Moran has a closer look.
In 6 months, America will hold an election unlike any other in the country's history. Almost certainly still in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic.
Are you prepared for this to strike again, say, in the fall?
In fact, I would anticipate that that would actually happen because of the degree of transmissibility.
Donald Trump and Joe Biden, two men in their 70s, two men in the age group among the most vulnerable to this virus, will battle for the nation's highest office. At the start of this election year, the political terrain looked very different. President Trump making his case for re-election in his State of the Union address just 3 months ago, describing what seems almost a different world.
Jobs are booming, incomes are soaring, poverty is plummeting, crime is falling, confidence is surging, and our country is thriving and highly respected again. I am thrilled to report to you tonight that our economy is the best it has ever been.
That was then. The reality of pandemic America now, 30 million people have lost their jobs in the U.S. The unemployment rate, economists say, is likely near 20% of the workforce, the worst since the Great Depression. Tens of thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands by November, killed by this disease. So much of our lives shut down. President Trump's performance leading the nation's response, for better or worse, and how a President Biden might lead the country differently out of the pandemic, that's the big issue now.
I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. I mean, that's what we're fighting. I mean, it's a very tough.
President Trump calls the coronavirus the invisible enemy, and history shows having a common enemy helps incumbent presidents running for re-election. James Madison was re-elected during the War of 1812, Lincoln during the Civil War, FDR, World War II, Nixon, Vietnam, and George W. Bush, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. President Trump has, on occasion, sought to rally the country.
We are all in this together. We must put politics aside, stop the partisanship, and unify together as one nation and one family.
Polls show there was a brief Trump bump, but it has faded. The rancor and the bitterness have returned, led often by the president himself on Twitter, raging at his critics, at briefings, tearing into reporters.
You know you're a fake.
Claiming power he does not have.
When somebody's the president of the United States, the authority is total.
And then there was this bizarre moment.
Right, and then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number in the lungs. So it'd be interesting to check that.
Despite the stumbles, Trump's emerging re-election strategy going forward appears twofold. Declare victory in the pandemic, no matter what, and attack Joe Biden as too feeble and too compromised by his long history in Washington to be trusted with the presidency at this critical moment. The Trump campaign already hitting Biden on not being tough enough on China.
Our self-interest that China continue to prosper. What a beautiful history we wrote together.
And President Trump loses no chance to praise his own performance.
We're very proud of the job we've done.
In response to Trump's case to the voters, Joe Biden so far, locked down at his home in Delaware, has had a tough time connecting. Last week, he told Hillary Clinton that if things had gone as he'd hoped, he wouldn't even be in the race.
I wish this were us doing this and my supporting your re-election for President of the United States. You won the majority of the vote.
But here he is. The question now, how can he campaign and get his message to the American people? He's tried to mix it up, this virtual campaigning, with mixed results.
Well, I thought we'd play some chess. What do you think?
I'd like to play chess. I've been playing on my cell phone. That's about it. I got a beautiful chessboard upstairs. I haven't got anybody to play with.
The technology seems to have gotten the better of him and his team sometimes.
Maureen, are you there? Been such a disjointed effort here because of the connections, but
the Biden plan is clear. Go after Trump's record during the pandemic, hard, as in this recent ad.
Donald Trump left this country unprepared and unprotected for the worst public health and economic crisis in our lifetime.
But Biden will also have to defend his record and continue to face the recent allegations by Tara Reade, a former staffer, that Biden sexually assaulted her in the early 90s, a claim Biden has flatly denied. Most analysts expect a close election in November again. Familiar battlegrounds in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. And a new question looms. How will America conduct an election during a pandemic? How will we vote? Election experts say it can be done, but preparations must begin now.
In 1918, we voted in the midst of a pandemic. We voted in the middle of wars. We have to worry that our democracy doesn't collapse, and we have to make sure that we have a way to have a successful vote in November so that all eligible voters who want to vote will be able to cast a ballot that will be fairly and accurately counted.
No election has ever been postponed. It's not something the president even has the power to do. So the campaign will go on. The contest between Donald Trump and Joe Biden somehow decided by voters. A contest also of democracy against disease.
Our thanks to Terry for that. For more on what to expect in the next 6 months to Election Day, let's bring in our political team, ABC News political analyst Matthew Dowd and former Chicago mayor and ABC News contributor Rahm Emanuel. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Matt, let's start with you. Is the pandemic the most pivotal issue for November? Does the winner of the election all come down entirely to how the president handles the response in the next few months?
Well, I think if you tie the pandemic and wrap it with the economy, those two fundamental issues are going to define the election in November. How he handles the pandemic and therefore how the economy, whether it grows, what it does, whether it continues to contract. I think those are the two fundamental decisive moments, and it's the president's competency on the pandemic and how that influences the economy will decide this election.
And Rahm, the president has had the bully pulpit throughout these briefings and generally being center stage in the response, while Joe Biden has disappeared a bit in recent weeks. So what can he do to break through? Or is this moment more advantageous for Biden to sit back and let President Trump potentially have some unforced errors?
Well, I would say, first of all, this is a scene right now of Trump versus Trump. And Trump's losing that battle. And usually the part of political fighting is when somebody's got in a knife fight with themselves, don't get in the middle of it. And I don't think the president of the United States is helping himself. I think you can see that clearly by polling numbers and other types of numbers. The real challenge or question is not what Joe Biden's doing now, but how is he using this time right now to prepare for a point in time when, in fact, it will get more to a mano-to-mano situation. The thing that you have to know about Donald Trump, he only can exceed when he has an opponent. He has what he's experiencing right now is basically the equivalent of political vertigo. He's looking at trying to find the Chinese as a confrontation point, the World Health Organization as a confrontation point, the governors, the media as a confrontation point. And without Biden engaging directly, and that won't last the whole distance, but right now, the president looks like he's challenging only himself. And by playing this divisive game, it's hurting the president. So for now, it's a good strategy or tactic, I would say. Long term, it's not going to work all the way through November, and the campaign's not even thinking like that.
And let's talk a bit about that as far as how the pandemic will change how the candidates campaign. We could see virtual conventions, and we'll likely see far fewer rallies and big events. So, Matt, who does that hurt more?
Well, I don't think the honest answer is I don't think we fundamentally know. I mean, I think Donald Trump draws a lot of his energy, as we saw in 2016 and throughout his presidency, from crowds, from people around him. That's where he gets all his sort of level of passion and engagement in that. But, come September and October and where this is, I do think what we're going to see this time more than other elections is style is going to become less important than substance is going to become more important than style in the midst of this. And therefore, I think the debates, while often decisive, are going to become incredibly important in this time when those debates are had in the midst of it. So crowd sizes, rallies, all of that, all this traditional stuff of campaigns look like they're going to go away to a degree. And so I think once you put an emphasis more on substance and less on style, you'd have to give the benefit in that point to Joe Biden. But again, there's so much unknown in this, and how this is all unfolds in the fall, we don't know yet.
And Rahm, question to you now. Biden was criticized during the primaries for not having much of a specific agenda, speaking of that substance that Matt was just referring to. But can he run on the experience and the steady hand argument, or does he need something more to win in November?
Well, actually, let me take one step back and answer the question to Matt that you just asked. And I would say that in this case, the vice president is a known entity, 8 years of being a vice president and not going away. So it's a little different than if all of a sudden you had a senator or a governor who hadn't had a national platform.
Right.
Slightly different. We should also, and I will just say this, being humble is not a natural attribute for me here, but we're all in uncharted water. So this is just basically a good guess. I would say less on substance and more on character.
Right, and that makes sense. The character looms large here. And let's also talk about how we vote in November. We saw the backlash when Wisconsin voters had to vote in person during the pandemic. So, Matt, how do you see this playing out as far as states making it safe and accessible to vote if this pandemic is still a major issue in the fall?
Well, for a national election, as we all know, this is a national election for president, but it really is a state by state how it unfolds. And I think a number of states have already made the decision that they're going to go to ballot by mail, regardless of what the president thinks and regardless of what some Republican leaders think. So they're going to go to that. So many of the states that weren't sort of universal ballot by mail are going to ballot by mail. I think the answer to that question in the states that haven't moved that far is where does this pandemic stand? Where does the level of cases stand in September and October in order to make that decision? I think as Wisconsin demonstrated, people want to come out and vote regardless of what's in their way and regardless of the impediments, both people for Donald Trump and as well as people that are against Donald Trump and want him removed from office. I don't think we're going to have any problem with turnout in this election. I think we're going to set records on totals. More than 150 million people will vote in the presidential election, but I think each state is going to be different in this. But so far, a number of states have already decided they're going to ballot by mail, universal. So if anybody wants to send a ballot in by mail, they're going to be able to do that. And a number of other states that are sitting on the fence are going to depend on where we stand on the virus come October.
And last question to you, Ram. How realistic is it for us to see more states using mail-in ballots? I mean, we've seen some GOP resistance to widening ballot access. Can states really prepare for that while in the middle of this emergency?
They're going to have to. And I would just say that it's very, very important that, and I think a lot more states will do it. I would also add the emphasis, and when I say do it, meaning vote by mail. But I would also add the emphasis when you look and study Wisconsin, and to me, what they put together, the voter constant, the constant being on top of, did you get your ballot? Did you vote? What can we do to help you? It was that type of concierge service, I would say, to the voters that has to be replicated in Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Arizona and North Carolina.
Matt, Ram, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom as always. And when we come back, the long road to recovery. We are on the ground in Italy as that country finally seems to have turned the tide in the fight against COVID-19. Plus, the other global health emergency, the threat to our mental health, the challenges many of us are facing during this lockdown, and how we're still coming together. And the NFL's plan to make sure the season starts on schedule, even if games do look a little bit different. We'll be right back. Talking now about the road to recovery. After months of suffering, of heartache, of unimaginable loss, things in Italy are starting gradually to come back to life. Our James Longman is in Italy with a closer look at their new normal.
It's been a long time coming, an emotional moment for these Italian grandparents and their granddaughter. Just a few weeks ago, it would have been normal. Now, it's a celebration of freedom and of family. Today, after months of being apart, Domenico and Maria Antonia finally reunited with their 5-year-old granddaughter, Cecilia.
Disperati, la quarantena l'abbiamo passata disperati. Adesso non riesco neanche a parlare, che sono troppo emozionato. 2 mesi che non la vediamo, è solo videochiamata, però non è lo stesso. Non può essere lo stesso.
For many, Italy seems to be finally turning the tide. The once desolate streets of Italy's major cities are starting to show signs of coming back to life.
È una liberazione e poi vedere il verde, i fiori è qualcosa di indescrivibile, la gioia che mi procura. Sì, è proprio bella.
Restrictions eased to allow a return to work for some 4.5 million people. Construction and manufacturing back, parks open. New life for a country where death seemed to have no end. One of the first and most deadly outbreaks outside China, the toll heartbreaking. With more than 200,000 cases and nearly 30,000 dead, this was a trauma that will take time to heal. The town of Bergamo was one of the hardest hit.
This is the road on which military vehicles were pictured carrying the bodies of the dead from the cemetery out of town. It was a key moment, really, that woke this country up to the true scale of the crisis. But the mayor here says that the death toll may be as much as 5 times what's been reported.
Bergamo's hospital, the focus of global panic.
It was almost an apocalypse, and dozens of patients a day.
Dr. Roberto Consentini runs the emergency unit. The world saw overwhelmed.
When was the moment that you really realized something serious was happening?
When I saw with my eyes several patients all over the emergency room with the helmets and with oxygen all over. Every room was full, was filled with patients with difficult breathing. So in that moment I realized that it could have been terrible, because I think that figures talk to the brain, but images talk to the heart. In that moment I realized that preparedness was everything.
For so long, Italy's dead were buried without ceremony. Now, small funerals are allowed once more, some dignity restored. This is a cautious first step. Documentation is still needed to go outside, masks and gloves required on public transport in some areas. The danger of the virus returning is very real.
A second peak is always a possibility, and this is why we haven't closed everything about COVID departments, because we want to be ready. But I personally think that the difference is that this time we will be more prepared.
As Italy starts to come out of its crisis, people are now starting to work out just how it could have gotten so bad in this part of the country. And one theory is to look for moments when thousands of people congregated at the same time, like, for example, at a soccer match. Well, one took place here at around about the same time that Italy discovered its first case. And who were they playing? A team in Spain, Valencia. And cases from here in Italy and that part of Spain were linked.
And Italy now has time to understand the long-term impact to COVID patients.
Fatigue and probably depression will be major challenges. We are afraid of seeing even neurological consequences of the disease, which are not well understood at the moment, but we know that the virus penetrates into the nervous system.
Despite the challenges, there's hope now.
And what's it like for you now? Finally, you're getting time to breathe?
Yes, we have time to breathe now. So yes, for example, some of us have taken some day off just to rest because it was really, really heavy to work in these conditions. Now the situation is better. Yesterday we closed our intensive care department. That was for us a great success.
Sylvia, like so many others, taking the time to appreciate small victories and the moments that count.
And James Longman joins us now in Italy with more. James, certainly a lot of good signs, as we just saw, but Italy still faces plenty of challenges over the next 3 months, including reopening schools and also a drop in tourism.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, Lindsay? Each country says that they've kind of, got the science to back up their approach, and yet each country seems to want to go their own way. I was in Sweden and Denmark just a couple of weeks ago, and the Danish minister there was saying the science is telling us that we need to lock down, and yet just over the border in Sweden, the Swedish health minister was saying, well, we don't need a lockdown, and it's kind of the same here in Italy. I think one area that hasn't moved a muscle is tourism, and a lot of people have been messaging me today, people I know and people I don't know, asking me just when they can come and take their vacations in Italy. The answer to that question is not anytime soon. Like I said, Italy wants to make sure that there is no chance of a second wave before it moves forward. It wants to get there. It's just being very, very careful.
But the good news for Italy, I guess, is that there is a desire for people to return. James Longman, our thanks to you. Coming up next, your favorite stores hit hard. We dig into the numbers to see what America's retailers are up against as they try to bounce back. But first, our tweet of the day, a reminder to stay safe, and may the 4th be with you. Welcome back. And now we turn to the pandemic's devastating impact on the U.S. retail industry. Today, clothing giant J.Crew became the first major retailer to declare bankruptcy amid the pandemic. But experts expect an unprecedented wave of business failures to come. We take a closer look now by the numbers. Retail sales are down about 50%, and experts predict about 25,000 stores to close this year, according to the Strategic Resource Group. J.Crew, with its 193 stores, filed for bankruptcy today, but hopes to reorganize and reopen some stores when the lockdowns lift. With department store sales down as much as 80%, legendary mega stores like Sears and JCPenney are also in peril. But sales are up about 25% at discount stores like Walmart, Costco, and BJ's. Before this crisis, retail sales had been growing at a rate of 3.7% each year and had been one of the strongest sectors of the U.S. economy, according to census data. 89% of retail sales happen in-store, according to the National Retail Federation, making these lockdowns particularly devastating on the retail industry. And since about 70% of the U.S. economy is driven by retail activity, this crisis has far-reaching consequences. And when we come back, a different global health emergency. Nearly 1 in 5 adults in America lives with mental illness, and COVID-19 is making that even harder to treat. A closer look at the challenges and how people are still finding ways to cope and come together. Plus, the supermarket staple prices are expected to skyrocket. We'll tell you what you could be paying more for at your next trip to the grocery store.
More than 30 states around the country are restarting businesses. This as coronavirus cases are rising in some states like Texas and Utah, which are among those states loosening restrictions. Governors continue to hone in and ramp up COVID-19 testing, insistent on gathering as much data as possible as they decide when and how to reopen their states.
It's incredibly important to the success of our community tracing program, both of which will have a lot to do with the new normal once we get there.
New York continues to see what state leaders are calling a substantial amount of new cases, but Governor Andrew Cuomo announcing the state has now passed 1 million tests.
We're doing more testing than any other state or any other country per capita, so we're coming online very, very quickly. But we still have more to do.
Some supermarkets like Kroger and Giant Eagle have put limits on the amount of meat customers can buy due to shutdowns at meat processing plants. Costco says shoppers can buy 3 packages of beef, pork, or poultry because of high demand. Clothing company J.Crew becoming the first major national retailer to file for bankruptcy in this pandemic.
Several chains, including Neiman Marcus, have been pushed to the brink of bankruptcy by the coronavirus closures.
Scientists are on high alert for so-called murder hornets in the U.S. for the first time. The large insect that can decimate the bee population can also be deadly to humans.
Killer hornets invading the U.S. and Canada. Asian giant hornets, also known as murder hornets, spotted in Washington state, and they prey on honeybees that pollinate much of our food. These hornets grow up to 2 inches long, roughly 5 times the size of a bee. And in Japan, where they originate, they reportedly kill up to 50 people each year.
Come here, buddy. You just messed it. Come up here for a second. Just come on.
It's rough working from home.
The maps aren't going to move because he just whacked the computer with his head.
In this viral moment, Golden Retriever Brody hijacked Fox 13's Paul Delgado's weather forecast, all for some affection.
Partly cloudy, turning more humid with temperatures again in the mid-80s. Didn't mean to keep you up. Next time, buddy, we're going to eat after this. So that's the forecast.
Then going in for a close-up.
Oh boy.
The clip has been viewed nearly 1.5 million times.
May is Mental Health Month, and during these difficult times, we find ourselves stretched thin and stressed out. The sheer force of this virus is taking so many lives, causing an immense amount of pain and suffering, some of it manifesting itself physically, and a lot of it mentally. Many are now battling isolation, addiction, and depression. So as we explore a number of aspects of mental health this month, we begin with a look at how finding therapy is so critical right now, even if that therapy is dancing. Our Maggie Ruley has more.
Isolation, quarantine, social distance. In a time of unprecedented separation, humanity still finds a way to come together. Humans are social, and living life at a distance has left many people craving connection now more than ever. Hillary Cadigan recently wrote about her own isolated experience in Bon Appetit.
I was feeling very just like placeless in the world.
She says about 5 years ago, she was suffering from anxiety and she couldn't sleep.
Was just kind of in this like very keyed up state all the time of just sort of like extra sensitive to everything. And just like very in my brain, you know, like when you feel like you're like trapped in your own brain.
But then her friend told her about this meditative dance class, and she says it changed her life.
It's like therapy for me. You kind of like leave it all behind on the floor. Like all of your anxiety, it's like, I like to think of it like physically, like I'm just like literally like shedding my anxious feelings and like sad feelings or like anger about whatever stupid thing happened during the day and just like leaving it on the dance floor.
It became a central part of who she was for half a decade until the pandemic hit. Suddenly, she was cut off from the people and the practice that she had relied on.
And it was just like this like anxious energy where I was just like, I'm not moving at all.
Hillary isn't alone. And now doctors say they aren't worried only about COVID-19. They're worried about another global health emergency, loneliness, and its impact on mental health.
I think for a lot of people, even if you were anxious before, there's things to be anxious about right now. Yeah, does mental health sort of move like that? Is it a roller coaster? Is that normal?
Well, what I would say, not one of NAMI's expressions is you are not alone. It's never been more true than right now, because all of us are experiencing some anxiety.
Dr. Ken Duckworth is the chief medical officer at the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI. He says paying attention to that anxiety is important. But he says it's a feeling that's often overlooked in our society. When we have an ache or a pain, we seek a remedy to help us cope. We know it's crucial to stay active to maintain our physical well-being. But according to Dr. Duckworth, the key to overall wellness doesn't stop with just physical activity.
Well, there is no health without mental health. The brain and the body are connected. You've seen people jump at a movie when it gets scary. It's physical and it's emotional at the same time. And if your mental health is troubled, your health will feel the effects. Depression correlates with cardiac problems, heart trouble, right? Anxiety correlates with addiction vulnerabilities. Like, there are all kinds of ways that our mental health impacts our physical health.
Studies show there are many factors over the course of a life that contribute to mental health problems, including biological factors such as genes or brain chemistry, life experiences like trauma and abuse, and a family history of mental health problems. But this pandemic is testing the mental state of humanity on a scale we've never seen before.
But this is really unusual. I mean, it's really unknown.
Never before in modern history have we experienced this kind of vast isolation. Suddenly, many communities have been separated, and we're learning in real time how this can impact the human mind.
Humans are intensely social creatures. We like hanging out with people. People like going to the office, maybe not because they like their job, but because they like the people to hang out with. Somebody who remembers your birthday. And that's all been removed. Now we're all on our own. We're all, independently isolated. Isolation is hard on people. Social connection is beneficial for people.
Nearly 1 in 5 adults in America currently live with a mental illness, but only about half of those affected seek out treatment, often because of the stigma attached to it.
So this idea of kind of negative feelings or shame about seeking help, right, are a problem. Many people don't seek help. Some people with more serious illnesses can't appreciate that they're ill. Do I have a mental health problem? Which I want to acknowledge still carries a low social status, right, in our society. It's not still the same. Having bipolar disorder is not the same as having cancer or cardiac disease in terms of people's recognition of it as a problem that is acceptable to get help. I think the issue is to make the leap to realize that you could actually feel better on the other end of this, that your symptoms, which are plaguing you and causing you suffering, might actually be addressed.
Mental health professionals emphasize that physical, not social, distancing is what's so important right now. We might have to stay away from each other, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't stay connected. Things like FaceTiming, video conferencing with friends, writing to people at an elderly home, reconnecting with family, or using telemedicine to meet virtually with a professional therapist. For Hillary, her therapy comes in the form of dance.
It's just like this incredible release.
When her classes were canceled due to social distancing guidelines, she knew the physical connection was gone, but not the emotional.
So one day I just was like, okay, I'm just gonna dance.
So she started leading classes from home, asking for donations that go to a local charity.
There's this feeling of helplessness that I think we're all kind of, feeling. So it's nice to be able to sort of like slightly fight back against that feeling of helplessness by turning this into something a little bit bigger and collecting donations because of it. And it's like nice to be like offering our dance to them.
We joined them, and in living rooms and kitchens all around the world, with friends in Greece, Amsterdam, and Los Angeles, me in London, Hillary in New York, we let loose. Afterwards, everyone says they feel different.
I was a tense ball of stress before this, just coming off of work, and now I feel like I've let all of that tension go and I feel free.
And while we were physically apart, socially and emotionally, we danced together. And while there are so many unknowns about what the future of all of our lives will look like, it's important to check in on yourself by checking out what's in your head.
If you're having sleep problems and negative thoughts, thinking of harming yourself, you've lost 20 pounds because you've lost interest in eating, you have no more passion for anything, you can't experience any pleasure.
And whether or not you're experiencing any of these symptoms, Dr. Duckworth gives us simple but important strategies to take care of yourself.
But maintaining a structure, taking a shower, sticking with some kind of schedule, getting exercise to reduce your physical anxiety, right? Helps you sleep, helps you calm down. Deep breathing reduces physical anxiety. Minding your sleep is really important. If you're sleeping well, your mental health is more likely to be in a good place.
And one thing all experts can agree on, you are not alone. Find your own outlet to help cope with these tough times, whether it be a virtual dance party or calling a friend. But most importantly, it's remembering we are all in this together. Maggie Rulli, ABC News, London.
Our thanks to Maggie and her fellow dancers. So maybe you're better suited for the type of meditation where you sit still. And that's where we need to bring in our own resident meditation expert and author of Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics and host of the 10% Happier podcast, our own Dan Harris joins us now. He's in studio tonight, safely 6 feet away, practicing what we preach with the social distancing. Okay, so why now, during a pandemic, is this the good time to learn how to meditate and be still?
Have you felt anxious at all during the pandemic?
Course.
Yes. So one of the areas where meditation has been shown to help in scientific research is anxiety and depression, two issues that I've struggled with since I was a little kid. And what meditation can do is give you a different relationship to your obsessive thoughts. And that's what anxiety and depression often are. They're two separate things, but anxiety is mostly future-oriented. Depression is often oriented toward the past. It's repetitive thought patterns. And we tend to just believe whatever thought marches into our consciousness, and meditation can help you step out of it and to view your thoughts with some, dare I say, journalistic remove, and then you're not owned by them. And that's really powerful.
And how do you do it? I mean, what are the tips for somebody like me who, as soon as I'm trying to focus on my breathing, but I'm thinking about, what do I have to do the next day in my list at the grocery store? So I guess it sounds like a really basic question, but how do you train your thoughts?
This is the big question. Well, there are several, but this is something I hear a lot, having written a book for fidgety skeptics. When I hear you say that you sit and try to focus on your breath, Usually that's what we do in meditation, try to feel our breath coming in and going out, and then you get distracted. To me, I hear somebody meditating correctly. The goal of meditation is not to clear your mind. That's impossible unless you're enlightened or you have died. The goal of meditation is to notice every time you've become distracted and to start again and again and again. And that's like a bicep curl for your brain. And this changes the wiring of your brain. We see this on the brain scans of people who meditate. So don't expect to float off into the cosmos. Instead, you're going to be noticing the distraction over and over and over again. And that's really important because when you see how crazy you are, and we are all crazy. If we were to broadcast your inner dialogue aloud, they would lock you up. When you see how crazy you are, you lower the odds that you're going to be owned by the craziness.
For people who are saying, look, during this time, I have a real problem. I'm depressed and anxious. How is breathing going to help me?
Yeah, I hear that. And I don't think it's going to solve all of your problems. There's a reason why my podcast is called 10% Happier. Nothing is going to solve all of your problems. Let's not try to sugarcoat this situation. We're in a pandemic that is really dangerous to a lot of people physically, and it's also really dangerous to a lot of people economically. And then you combine those two things, and it's dangerous to all of us psychologically. I'm not saying that meditation is going to solve all of that, but how would you rather navigate the current difficulties? With some increased sense of calm and self-awareness and compassion, or would you like to navigate it with your hair on fire?
For people who are viewing this time as stuck in life, stuck at home, is this a bit of it? Could you view it as kind of a vacation, a mental vacation?
To me, the real gift of the kind of meditation I'm talking about is it's not a vacation so much. It's getting, it's not going to erase all of your neuroses, as one great meditation teacher once said. It'll make you a connoisseur of them. It'll give you a sense of humor about these habitual thought patterns that were injected by your parents, injected by the culture, whatever. And so that you're not yanked around by this malevolent puppeteer of your ego so much. And yes, that can be calming in the end because you're not so wound up all the time, but nothing's going to come in and magically erase all of your problems. It just doesn't work like that.
I know personally I need more Dan Harris in my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
For those tips. We appreciate it. And a reminder that all of you can listen to Dan's podcast, 10% Happier, for more insight on how meditation can help transform your life. And one doctor we spoke to recently put it this way: it's so important that you do that checkup from the neck up. And up next, are you ready for some football? Details on the NFL's plan to start the season on schedule. Plus, one day, hopefully soon, the quarantine will end and we can start to get back to our quote-unquote normal lives. But when that happens, what will we miss? And what will we take away from these strange times? We'll try to answer that question coming up next. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we are remembering NFL great Don Shula, who passed away at the age of 90. Shula won 347 games as head coach, the most in pro football history, and led the Miami Dolphins to the only perfect season in NFL history. Meanwhile, the NFL is set to release its schedule for the 2020 season in the coming days. The season is still scheduled to start on time, but will not include any international games for the first time in 13 years. This is such a strange time for all of us, cooped up inside, worried about that next meal or next paycheck or 1,000 other things. But despite the stress and anxiety, we've also learned a lot about ourselves and our communities along the way. ABC's David Wright is no exception.
Video conferencing has been a lifeline in these trying times.
What you guys been up to?
Just some work.
Helping us to educate our kids. Celebrating our holidays, and just keeping in touch with each other. Not to mention work from home. Commuting has never been easier. And Casual Friday now has a whole new meaning. You can dress for success in the Zoom window, but out of frame, anything goes. Who needs pants for that matter? Can I get an amen, Will Reed?
Thank you. Yep, that's me. Busted. Wearing shorts on GMA. My casual bottom half going viral.
I was wearing shorts yesterday as well. My camera was just a little bit higher.
People have rediscovered ways to connect as well. Our family has bonded over card games like Uno Attack. Puzzles and board games that were gathering dust have given the whole family, including the dog, hours of enjoyment. Other families have come up with creative ways to get close despite the distance. Never before in 105 years has Betty Edwards of Standish, Maine had her very own birthday parade. This couple in Louisville hosted a drive-through wedding reception. April was the cruelest month, emptying the streets, filling up the hospitals. Still, people have found new ways to be kind. Here in New York, the family owners of an Italian restaurant, Terralucci and Vino, have kept busy delivering meals to hospitals. Others have channeled their inner Betsy Ross, making masks for local hospitals. 8th grader Emma Quint of Elkins, West Virginia, has made 150 masks so far. You can't visit your favorite museum right now, but the Getty Museum invited its patrons to embody their favorite works of art and post the images on the Getty's website. It doesn't get much more creative than this. Unless you're a musician, the quarantine has brought us choirs, lifting me higher and higher, symphonies, and operas. The Old Globe Theater in San Diego can't do Shakespeare plays right now, so artistic director Barry Edelstein has been doing Shakespeare sonnets instead.
Such a beautiful line that really speaks to me about what's going on in our world right now. How with this rage shall beauty hold a plea, whose action is no stronger than a flower.
And there's the dancing. Whoever said dancing is the hidden language of the soul obviously wasn't on TikTok. Presumably, gems like these will continue when quarantine comes to an end, but for all of the uncertainty, all of the hardship, all of the tragedy that some people have experienced, all of us worldwide have had important time to reflect on who and what is most important to us. When we finally do emerge from our separate houses after all this, there is a lot to look forward to, but also some things we'll miss.
I think what I'm gonna miss most about quarantine is my attempt to dunk a basketball. So it's gonna be a little bit upsetting if stay-at-home orders get lifted and I still can't dunk.
Getting to watch the minute changes that occurred in my almost 3-year-old.
Probably most of all would be dinner as a family. It's so nice to slow down and not be racing to practices.
It's really nice to just kind of do everything on my own terms, on my own pace, and not have to worry about being somewhere at a certain time.
Definitely includes my cats. This is Petunia and Jasper.
The thing that I'm going to miss most about quarantine is spending so much quality time with my 1-year-old daughter and husband and dog.
David Wright, ABC News, New York.
Dinner as a family, for sure. Thanks to David. Before we go tonight, the image of the day. Brazil's Christ the Redeemer statue, all lit up as if wearing a protective mask. The statue towering over Rio de Janeiro also reads, "Masks save" in Portuguese. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Have a great night.